Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to News24 Frontline. My name is Qaanitah Hunter. Thank you very much for joining us. We're talking coalitions today, and 2 weeks is a very long time in politics. Just to say, I went to Europe for 2 weeks, and when I came back, there is a new mayor in the city of Joburg and a new mayor in Nelson Mandela Bay. So, how does this happen? Now, since the 2021 municipal elections, there has been an unprecedented number of municipalities which are hung where there is no single party that has a clear majority, which is 50 plus one. Now, of the 8 metros in the country, only 2 are governed with an outright majority, which means coalitions has become a permanent feature, at least on local government level. Some coalitions agreements are more stable than others, but in metros, especially in the metros, has been a lot of instability where in some cases there are up to 9 parties governing together, resulting in a lot of chaos and at times power shifts. Now, do coalitions bring instability? That's the question that we want to answer today. But more importantly, what is the future of coalition governments in South Africa? What can we learn from what happened in the city of Joburg and Nelson Mandela Bay in relation to what may happen on a national level in the 2024 elections? We have to unpack the chaos of city of Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay in understanding where we are as a country in relation to coalition governments. To answer these questions, I'm joined in this panel by News24 Editor-in-Chief, Adriaan Basson. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm also joined by Jason Felix, News24 parliamentary reporter, News24 Metro reporter Alex Patrick, and political reporter Zintle Mahlati. Thank you all for joining us. Adriaan, you smiling? You've just been to Europe. We've been together with Jason. So I want to start to talk about your trip and not about the tourist sites, but about the politics that we observe there. But before we start this discussion, I want to implore whoever's watching if you have any questions for any member of this panel, please feel free to type it in the chat box. We will get to it towards the end of the conversation. If you want to direct it to any specific member of the panel, please do so. Otherwise, I will take the liberty to direct the questions to any one of our panelists today. Now, Adriaan, let me start with you. We've been on a trip to Germany. You've described it as a magnificent study tour where a group of journalists, I was included, Jason was there, was exposed to Germany and their long history of coalition politics. Let's start at the beginning. Are coalitions good or bad? Can we answer that very simple question for our audience today?
Well, good afternoon, Qaanitah and colleagues, and to all our News24 viewers. Qaanitah, as someone who regularly lectures me that binary is not the answer, I'm surprised by your question. Coalitions are not only good or not only bad. They can be very good if they're stable and if parties can agree on basic matters of delivery. I think so far in South Africa, coalitions are only at local government level. Which means it's really issues of service delivery. It's about keeping the lights on, keeping the water running, and filling up the potholes, to be blunt. And I think for me, the lesson or one of the biggest takeaways from our study tour to Germany has been that coalitions are complex. They are complicated. They are not simple. They are tough to negotiate. There's there's quite often winners and losers. Those being left out of a coalition. But it seems to me that the electorate, at least in Germany, wants coalitions. We haven't had a majority party ruling Germany for longer than 70 years now. So there is something in coalitions. There's something healthy and very democratic, I think, in coalitions, which keeps parties accountable, which says not one of you are big enough or strong enough to rule on your own. But with that comes consequences, and sometimes some messy consequences. In one of our meetings with a provincial government in Germany, which was ruled by a majority party for many years, but recently had to go into coalitions, it was quite tangible, as you kind of feel with the ANC these days, that they are not really happy with the fact that they have to co-govern now with others. But ultimately, I do think there are democratic advantages to that form of government.
But in South Africa, we've had coalitions on a municipal level. It intensified in 2016 when the metros were hung, and then now in 2021, there's many more. But Jason, it seemed like there's a stark difference between how we do coalitions, or how we've been doing coalitions, at least in the local government levels, compared to what Germany has been doing. Can you sketch out a bit of the differences that you picked up on that trip?
Thanks, Qaanitah. I think, first of all, we need to agree that coalitions are difficult. Like Adriaan said, it's a complex matter. It's at times a difficult marriage. I think in Germany we learned that most coalitions are done by three parties, maximum three parties or two parties, which makes it easier to govern. Here in South Africa, I mean, if you look at the Johannesburg example, there's several partners in the coalition government. In Nelson Mandela Bay, I think there's 9 parties part of this coalition government. It's a difficult marriage. Any marriage is difficult, but if you have 9 people or 10 people in that marriage, it becomes even more difficult. One of the other things is also that Germany's been doing this for years. Our democracy is 27 years old. I think we need to be a bit more patient with ourselves and to understand that these things are going to be difficult. But one of the biggest points for me when it comes to coalitions is that we need to set some sort of value system and some sort of targeted plans to ensure that this coalition will work because everyone is on board. You have in coalitions like in Johannesburg, you had the Patriotic Alliance, I think, and you had the Freedom Front Plus. Now, these two parties are worlds apart from each other, and for them to work together will, in any case, be difficult. And I think this is part of the reason why the DA-led coalition in Johannesburg failed, because you had all these different spices coming together, but none of it made sense, and none of it actually could possibly work together. And in the end, it was only about positions, and it was only about who benefits from what position and from what, I don't know, contract or so. In Germany, it's a little bit different. Parties are much more mature. The smaller parties, they know they hold the key to these coalition governments. But here in South Africa, the smaller parties know they hold the key to getting positions, to getting the mayorship, to getting the speaker positions. So I think it's a matter of maturity. It's a matter of, first of all, coming together and saying, these are the values that we want. These are the things that we need to work on as a city, whether it's in Joburg, whether it's in Nelson Mandela Bay, or even in Cape Town. We never know what will happen in the future. Those sort of values need to be agreed upon before we take this relationship forward. Because if you have a situation where the extreme right and where the extreme left maybe come to the center, there's going to be problems. So I think it's the major point here is political maturity, and I think also we need to be a bit patient. Obviously, we don't have patience on our sides because the ANC is on a downward trend. And to wrap up, Qaanitah, I think we need to just focus on getting the right people in coalitions and not having parties that go to the extreme right or go to the extreme left, but have a set of common values that can actually work together.
Zintle, I'm going to bring you in here. After the municipal elections in 2021, there was this effort to for all smaller parties who, some got 2% of the vote, some instance, some got 8%, whatever it is, to work together to unseat the ANC. And in the city of Joburg, that was quite characteristic, and perhaps maybe Ekurhuleni as well, but we'll focus on the city of Joburg, where the DA was a hesitant player in these negotiations, in that they kind of realized that it from the onset that it was going to be quite difficult to govern with so many different players. But they were they were forced into it in an effort to push the ANC out. Do you think that primer, that basis in which the coalition agreement was then built, paved the way for the instability that we have since seen?
Absolutely. I don't think the DA was prepared for the coalitions. They were thrust into it. That caused skirmishes, obviously, later on, because when opportunities for other political parties to have a benefit came in. The issue is that they were never ready. I think that's the problem with why the DA was thrown into this position and why the city of Joburg is where it is. There was never a game plan from the beginning.
So let's talk about where the city is, Zintle. Let's just talk about what has happened to the point now where we have a new mayor in the city of Joburg. And Alex, you reminded me that the city of Joburg has had 5 mayors in the last 18 months. And if there isn't another picture of instability, there isn't another picture of what instability through coalition governments looks like what is playing out in the city of Joburg. But Zintle, come in here and say, what led us to this point where, again, the city of Joburg has a new mayor?
Like Jason said earlier on, what led us here was a fight over positions simply. People putting services behind and the need to advance themselves and their parties. The removal of Vasco da Gama was the prime opportunity for the Patriotic Alliance and for the DA's other political coalition partners to put their foot forward and start making changes to an agreement that was originally signed in December 2021 and then changed again in February to accommodate the Patriotic Alliance. So in looking back, one would have wondered whether we would be in this position if da Gama wasn't initially removed. But the issue at the moment is that the stability of the DA's coalition agreement with its coalition partners was always going to be a problem and a perfect brewing storm for the ANC to take advantage of. And the fact that at the moment, the idea that the DA doesn't want to share power amongst its partners allowed parties like COPE, one of its councillors, the only councillor that belongs to COPE within the council, to remove herself from the coalition without her party's permission. And the ANC was able to take advantage of that. So this whole power play between the big guys and the smaller guys, this back and forth between not wanting to share power, that is why the city of Joburg finds itself where it is right now. In an interesting discussion that I had with Solim Simang previously, about 2 days ago, he told me that when he looks back, he doesn't think that the coalition would have had any issues if the position that Gama held wasn't taken advantage of by the ANC. But he doesn't really come forth to admit the fact that the DA could have compromised and placed the coalition in a different situation at the moment. And most likely the Patriotic Alliance could have remained in the coalition.
So, Alex, so we had Vasco da Gama voted out. It was a late night vote, middle of the night, where the councillors removed him, and the kingmaker in that vote was Colleen Makubela, from COPE, and obviously the shift in the Patriotic Alliance saying we're no longer going to work with the DA, we're going to go with the ANC, and then there was this immediate call for this quick sitting of the council where Paul Palazzi was removed. Just tell us what happened and the controversy since.
Yeah, so I mean, it really began with the ousting of Vasco da Gama, and like you said, that was middle of the night stuff. That I think it actually ended at 2 a.m. They had to recount those votes 4 times, and that really does show you the kind of splitting of those alliances, because the DA coalition was leading by 10 votes, to then have Vasco voted out just shows you that kind of split. So yeah, so then we have a gap in that speaker position. Then there was the incident with our chair of chairs at the time, Colleen Makubela, who kind of inserted herself as the speaker, which ended up going to court. She had called an extraordinary sitting of council to vote in a new speaker. So that was set down for the 13th of September. The High Court ended up saying, no, you are not the speaker. You don't have a right for that position. So eventually that had to go to its normal time slot, which was on the 29th, I believe, of September, when parties were called to vote for a new speaker. Colleen obviously got that position, and despite saying that she would wait till after a small break, she ended up calling for the, I believe it was the 9th extraordinary sitting of council on the 29th of September, and that's when we saw the ousting of Mayor Mpho Phahlati. Sorry, Mpho.
Alex, can I jump in here and say that there was already cracks in the DA's coalition partners on display in that vote for the speaker position? It really showed us that something's going to happen with the mayor, because there was dissatisfaction from political parties that were in coalition agreements with the DA around the fact that that maybe the DA should not have the mayorship and the speaker position. And you saw that, Zintle, you covered, Action SA kind of having that public fallout with the DA, and it was almost an indication that you knew that something's going to happen with the speaker.
Definitely. With the speaker, the writing was on the wall for Mayor Phalati's future immediately. She knew herself, and the party itself knew that there's no way she would survive that moment. Not only was the election of Colleen cementing what had previously happened, with the speaker and Degama's removal, it was quite uncertain. It was quite a shock to the coalition, because some of the people who voted for Degama's removal had done so in secret. It was parties like the ACDP, some of their councillors, and one councillor from the IFP. So the coalition had thought that everything was fine. In the weeks leading up to Colleen Makuwele's election, there were various meetings held by the coalition, but rumors started coming out indicating that the coalition wasn't quite stable as it should be, because there was a fight and a grab over the power sharing and trying to make changes to an agreement that was already signed. So from then on, from the Monday before Colleen's election, the final meeting between the coalition partners had already set the ball in motion for what was going to happen.
And by the time there was the vote where Mpho Phahlati was ousted, there was a court application because they believed that it was unprocedural. So the courts were roped in, and this is not obviously the first time the court had to decide on what's happening in relation to coalition agreements. Just talk to me about that drama at the 11th hour before the vote happens.
There was no urgency in the matter. The DA wasn't able to stop the sitting from taking place. So they were not, the case wasn't heard. The case was heard, but the matter of urgency wasn't met. So Phahlati was removed, the sitting did take place. So the idea around the court case is that the meeting that took place the day before the council sitting that approved the sitting itself, the programming meeting, which consists of a variety of political parties. The ANC has and some of its partners have about 7 seats. The programming committee has about 15 seats. So in that particular meeting, which was called last minute on Thursday, the DA and its coalition partners walked out and wanting to ensure that there wasn't a quorum in place and decisions couldn't be taken. So this is one of the reasons, and one of the former Mayor Mpho Phalati's reasonings why the court should set aside as unlawful and unconstitutional the programming meeting that approved the special sitting which took place on Friday. She's questioning that meeting. She's also questioning the procedures followed within the council sitting, which saw her removal and the election of Tata Morero. She says that her party wasn't allowed to defend her. Normally within motions of no confidence, parties can have a debate defending themselves and providing reasoning. But Friday's council sitting was fast-paced. It was like there was already a clear plan in place, and it was just fast-tracking every single thing that would usually take place within a normal council sitting. This is all the reasoning that former Mayor Mpho Phahlati is taking to the High Court next week to argue for the reversal of her removal, Dada Moreira's election, and yeah.
But as things stands, Alex, Dada Morero is the mayor of Johannesburg.
As far as as far as that party is concerned, he is, and just jumping in there from what my colleague was saying, the coalition, the DA coalition members did not sign the register, and that is why they weren't recognized by the speaker, and that is why they weren't permitted to really challenge the motion, and the speaker used that to say that the motion went through unchallenged. A few of them did arrive, but as my colleague said, it was so quick. There was so much confusion, even in the gallery with the reporters. I mean, many of us didn't really even see the vote happening. It was a show of hands. As far as I'm concerned, the IEC was not in council. They were called in afterwards for the nomination of the mayor. But yeah, it was so quick. But or I suppose calling her former mayor or call her. But she said yesterday.
Let's call her former for now.
She herself believes she's still the mayor. So.
She does. She said yesterday. Absolutely, that's what she believes. So
the DA is fashioning what happened in the city of Joburg as this power grab, this illegitimate power grab by the ANC, aided and abetted by the Patriotic Alliance. But Jason, come in here. Just a week before that, the Democratic Alliance did the exact same thing in Nelson Mandela Bay, where they kicked out the ANC from office by moving to turn a few councillors in their favor. What happened there?
Qaanitah, I think the Nelson Mandela Bay coalition is probably the biggest coalition that we have in the country, or in the metros at least. There's about 9 parties. The DA co-opted one of the ANC's partners, the Northern Alliance. They co-opted them to work together with the DA. And our original permutation or analysis was that the opposition parties, the small opposition parties, together with the DA, our analysis was that they would only have needed the ANC, who has 8 seats, and that would have pushed them beyond the 61% or 61 seat mark, which they would have had to gain to take control of the municipality. But in true fashion, it is exactly the same. What happened to the DA in Joburg is exactly the same what happened to the ANC in the Eastern Cape, or in Nelson Mandela Bay, Gqeberha. The DA's mayor there is Retief Odendaal. The deputy mayor is Mpuseli Jack. They had about two months to work out this coalition agreement, and before this started, they worked out who's going to, or at least agreed upon who will take which positions. But it's exactly what happened with the ANC in Johannesburg. Late night meetings and very high paced, and before you know it, there's a new mayor in charge of the city. But it's exactly the same. The ANC had the support of the Patriotic Alliance, and surprisingly, the EFF, which initially said that they would not support the ANC, but instead all of the councillors in Nelson Mandela Bay of the EFF, they supported the ANC, and that wasn't enough. The support of the Northern Alliance and the Good Party, that 2 parties who together have 4 seats, they were the ones that managed to push the DA over that 61 seat mark. But remember, the DA has lots of problems with their coalitions. The Good Party and the DA is not on good footing, and neither is the Northern Alliance. They merely took that decision to join the DA coalition, I'm told, out of frustration with the ANC. And what happened also is that the Speaker of the Council, which was a Northern Alliance councillor, he managed to retain his position as Speaker, and the good councillor, which is Lawrence Struan, he managed to retain his position he had under the ANC-led coalition. So it's all fragile at the moment, and it can tip at any scale.
Adriaan, you have made the point after your trip to Germany, but you've argued that these anything but ANC coalitions don't work. It's not the silver bullet. We've seen now what's happened in the city of Joburg. We see what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay. What's the alternative? What do you argue should happen if I mean, parties are going to take the opportunity to unseat the ANC should it arise?
Qaanitah, let me just first say that I think what we are all experiencing at the moment feels quite messy, right, and quite unstable. And I think maybe when we look back in 2 years from now, that would have been a good thing, because maybe this is the time for South Africa's political parties to show their true colors, to show if they can stick to agreements, to show if what they say during campaigning time is borne out by their actions when they are in power or when they are part of a coalition. So I think the fact that a one-seat COPE member can basically start a domino effect to topple the city of Joburg is, in the bigger scheme of things, a good moment, a valuable moment for us to learn about coalitions and to see how these parties behave. I think South Africans have made it very clear that they don't want a one or a two or even a three-party state. That is a big moment in our body politic. It is a big shift from the ANC-led culture of politics that we've had for the past almost 30 years, where the ANC was dominant at national, provincial, and often local level. We are moving away from that, and it is a significant historical moment, and it would have been naive of us to expect that it would have gone smoothly without any interruptions or without these kind of power battles. I think what needs to happen now is that the political parties who want the ANC out of power need to come together and decide what do they agree on. It's one thing to say, let's kick the ANC out of power, but what do you do the next morning? What do you do the next morning when you have the keys to the treasury, when you have the keys to the legislature? How do you plan to govern? What can you agree on? So this coalition that we've just had in Johannesburg, for example, we've spoken a lot about that in this session, had parties like the Patriotic Alliance and the Freedom Front Plus and the ACDP in it. Now, if you look at those parties, the one is led by a former bank robber, and the other proposes for an Afrikaner state in the form of Urania, and the other is a quite, I think it would be fair to say, right-wing conservative Christian party. How do they land up in the same coalition, and how do they vote on matters that pertains to service delivery, specifically at local government level? And have they told their voters what they believe in and what they will do? That's why I'm critical of this anything but the ANC move. I can understand it. And I mean, I don't think we have to explain to our readers and subscribers on this webinar why people want to vote out the ANC. It is plain for all to see, specifically if you live in Johannesburg this week and you don't have water or electricity. It is desperate times. The ANC has broken down at many levels of government and is purely just not fit to govern anymore at many of our cities, provinces, and some would argue nationally. But what replaces that? And why do we think just because it's a coalition, it will be better? One of the other major things we saw in Germany, Qaanitah, and maybe you can also come in on that point, is that the party that gets the most votes, in our case, the ANC, mostly, frequently, and almost always leads the coalition and leads coalition negotiations. The ANC is completely absent at this point in time from putting together coalitions, from telling their own members and the larger public what their strategy with coalitions is. In fact, when the ANC went into their policy conference, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, their official position was that we are not interested in coalitions. We want to win outright. Well, that is not happening anymore, and it's not going to happen. So you better start to come up with a better answer to coalition politics, and don't wait for the class dropouts like the PA to lose power or to want more positions with the DA or others to get into the fold. So I think we are going to be forced to mature soon in this space. But I think, Qaanitah, it would be good to also hear from you, if I may ask you what you think the ANC's response will be to all of this, and whether what's happened specifically in Joburg will force the governing party into a more formal discussion around how they manage coalitions.
So the ANC has, long tried to be above the fray and be in denial almost, to say that we play to win. And Gwede Mantashe has consistently said that we're never going to talk about coalitions because coalitions is a product of us not failing to convince the electorate. Our plan is to convince the electorate to give us a majority, and that's what they've been sticking to in relation to 2024. But the writing is on the wall, and when you speak to leaders like Paul Mashatile, there is an agreement that coalition on a national level is going to be inevitable in some way. Maybe not even, maybe they won't even push it as far as national, but definitely in some provinces like Gauteng, for example. And there's a greater appetite now to say, okay, we need to start having these conversations. But these conversations, I don't think there's a realistic sort of understanding of what it's going to mean, and beyond just dishing out positions. Because how do you roll out things like foreign policy, for example? How do you handle the treasury and big decisions? So basically, is going to have to be a negotiation, a pre-negotiation before something happens. So let alone what happens in Parliament, but I'm saying just in the executive alone, there's going to have to be these constant negotiations, and obviously the implications of it at a national level and provincial level is way more than on a municipal level or on a metro level, because we see this multi-party caucuses, like for example in Tshwane, where there was, a deal about electricity that, again threatened to just collapse the agreement because parties, were not happy. But political parties, and I digress for 2 minutes to say, political parties have said this messiness that you see in coalitions is not bad for the voter. And I like what you said, because I'm not I don't believe in political binaries, but I think that there has to be broader discussions around how do we sort out these issues in the event that it's a deadlock, in the event that you're unable to reach agreements on certain levels. There has been proposals around legislation, for example, if a budget is not passed within a certain period of time. I mean, there's existing laws, but to intensify it with the realization that there's going to be more coalitions and coalitions on a national level. So amendment of legislation. People like Lindiwe Mazibuko, who has focused a lot of time on advocating for coalition government, say that these laws are efforts by the ANC, because the ANC started to talk about it. Oh, we need to put legislation in place to kind of govern processes. And if you look at the city of Joburg, you've also seen previously with the city of Tshwane, the ANC-led provincial government through the Qaanitah department led by Lebogang Maile had tried to overexert their power, and the same thing that's happening in Nelson Mandela Bay with the ANC heading the province and now the DA heading the municipality. The ANC trying to use their muscle in the province to push certain things through in terms of legislation changes. So there needs to be a mature conversation, Adriaan, no doubt, around just, okay, who are we open to speaking to? That's on one part. Also, the realization that so much of coalition negotiations are personality driven, right? And so what we heard from Julius Malema in his interview with me, that we would be more amenable to a Paul Mashatile-led ANC versus a Cyril Ramaphosa ANC, we cannot discount that, because that does play a role. Popularity politics will always play a role in South Africa. But the third thing is, what is going to be the mechanisms that kind of protect the voter when political parties can't sort their differences out, in terms of whether it's timeframes, whether it is interventions that are legislated. And so that is a separate discussion that needs to take place. And also, how do you power share in big departments that have no reference point in municipalities? So, like, for example, foreign policy, that's just how do you, does South Africa step out of BRICS? Is that a negotiation? So is every single area of governance going to be negotiated? And like you see in Germany, and that's what gives me a pit in my stomach, Adriaan, is that it took how many months in Germany? Like 3 months?
Yeah.
3 months.
In the previous election.
And I mean, they've been doing it for 70 years. So for me, that just gives me a pit in my stomach to say, if we cannot get past position brokering, how do you get to the more serious things around whether South Africa continues accessing loans from the World Bank, for example, and how those things how it affects governance, because everything is stonewalled along the way. And like I say, I shudder to think of what those cabinet meetings will look like. Whoever is the government of the day, whether it's a DA-led government of multi-parties or an ANC-led government on a national level through a coalition, I shudder to think how that just affects. If things take so long to happen now with the majority government, imagine what it's going to look like with the coalition. So that's just my visceral response in relation.
Qaanitah,
Yeah.
absolutely. If I may just quickly finish answering the question that you asked me a while ago. So I think that one of the major changes for me, and I think we maybe have underreported it in the past few weeks, has been the EFF, because the EFF has shifted. The EFF has shifted from last year November, when Julius Malema's party said they are not going to put the ANC back into power in any of the metros. And they didn't formally join any coalitions in at least Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, those two, and Nelson Mandela Bay, but they tacitly pushed the DA into power in at least Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni. And it seems to me that has changed. Well, in Joburg it has. In Joburg, the EFF has now voted for the ANC to be in power. And I think that, coupled with the toenadering that we've seen over the past few weeks between a new generation of ANC leaders in people like Panyaza Lesufi in Gauteng and the new leadership in KwaZulu-Natal, I do wonder if there is a change in attitude and potential coalitions between the ANC and the EFF, because the ANC, let's be realistic, will likely not go under 40% in the national election in 2024. They'll need about 10% or a bit less to govern. And that is the EFF. The EFF has pretty much hit the ceiling at about 10-11% of the electorate. And if you can start making deals with them now on a local government level, of course they will demand their pound of flesh. That could keep the ANC in power. But what does that mean? And does the electorate know this when they go to vote in 2024? And I think those are some very important discussions we have to have in the next 18 months.
Absolutely. I think the role of the EFF cannot be, and I mean, the manifestations of these talks, Adriaan, we are looking into the more urbanized big metros. But if you look closer to things that's happening in municipalities, in far-flung areas, in KwaZulu-Natal, you already see these shifts and these movements. Zintle, I want to bring you in here around the role of the EFF. They simply just do not demand positions. They don't want in on any of these coalitions. Do you think that this will still be sustained in 2024? Because Julius says if we don't win outright, we want it all. If we're gonna have it, we want it all.
No. I think the EFF is in discussions with the ANC. Julius Malema has said it publicly. ANC chairperson for Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, has also publicly stated that the two parties are in discussions. We've seen public pictures of the ANC leadership in KZN visiting the newly elected provincial leadership of the ANC there. So for me, in looking at the power play, I am seeing an EFF that is preparing itself for 2024 and aligning itself with the ANC for more in 2024. They might start demanding positions then and not now, and might be leading the ANC into its support base for what it wants. Adriaan is right that the EFF has shifted, but let's not forget, for the EFF and for its leader, he's always said that in voting the DA into power, it was never supporting the party itself, but about punishing the ANC. So there's been a huge shift from the party then. It's always hard to get a feeling of how the EFF and its local leaders decide on certain issues, because it always seems like the party itself and its leaders are the ones that make decisions. So there's been a huge shift, and the EFF is going to play such a key role in the ANC likely taking over so many municipalities that have been hung in the next coming months. as Panyaza Lesufe hinted yesterday, that the ANC is coming back in many municipalities, and the EFF will play a very key role in that. And I think the shift is all about 2024.
And I think, Zintle, we're going to watch your reporting in the next few months to see how that plays out. It's absolutely important to track those movements in the run-up to 2024. Jason, I want to bring you in the role of, in terms of the role of the Democratic Alliance, and a key figure in these negotiations, discussions, and permutations is Helen Zille. In the city of Johannesburg, she was made out to be the person who messed up the agreement. And there is this public perception that what Helen says goes. There's also John Steenhuisen writing in News24 today in response to Adriaan's column, saying they do not want to play into extortion politics because small parties are trying to extort positions out of them and they're not playing into that game. Do you think the DA is well suited to in terms of its leaders to negotiate properly ahead of or post 2024, if it wants to be the government?
Of course, yes, if it wants to be the government. Qaanitah, you mentioned that they don't.
So we don't know. We don't know if the DA wants to be the government.
At this point, we don't know. We're getting mixed messages. You talk about what we call, or what we term, extortion politics. So they don't want to get involved in that, but they're very happy to govern wherever they can. So that's the mixed message that they are sending us. People like Helen Zille plays a pivotal role in the negotiations. She played a big role in the Nelson Mandela Bay coalition government that has now succeeded, and she has somewhat succeeded there. I think that the DA is playing a game of watch and see. They know they have the Western Cape in the bag. They know they have Cape Town in the bag, certainly. I don't think any other party will govern this province, or the Western Cape at least, in the near future. There's a big focus on the Western Cape, and they obviously want to use the Western Cape as a model to show people from Gauteng or South Africans in Northern Cape and wherever else that this is how we govern. And from there, they take a wait-and-see approach to see what can we do. But surely if the EFF tells the DA that we are happy to work with you, I think they will take that opportunity. It happened in Joburg, and Zintle mentioned that the city of Johannesburg, the DA-led coalition in the city of Joburg, they were never ready for this coalition. They were almost forced into it. They took the opportunity and said, let's go for it. Someone like John Steenhuisen, I mean, his letter today tells a lot about him and his thinking of coalition politics. I don't think he is the kind of man that should be at the helm of leading coalition talks with parties like the ANC or any other smaller party. Of course, the DA has their smaller parties which will support them in any case, but I don't think that it will be enough, and I don't think the DA has enough political muster or political power, at least, and clout to muster a deal at a national level. Maybe at a provincial level, it could still work, but it will still be a bit broken. It will still be a bit volatile, like in Joburg and in Nelson Mandela Bay, and certainly Ekurhuleni and the city of Tshwane. But at this point in time, I think the DA is playing a watch and see game, and I don't think that is going to work for them if it comes to a point where nationally we have to go to a coalition. I think an ANC-EFF coalition looks more likely.
Adriaan, we have a question from Carol, one of our viewers, who says, can we really trust that the ANC will accept and abide by coalitions at a provincial and especially national level? So I would assume she's asking if the ANC is voted out by a multi-party coalition government, do you think the ANC will accept and abide by it?
There's no reason for me to say no. We've seen the ANC in opposition for quite a few years. So I also want to remind ourselves and our viewers that coalitions has actually been around for a long time, Qaanitah. In 2006, Helen Zille, then the mayor of Cape Town, put together a coalition government in the city of Cape Town with figures like controversial figures, extortionist even figures like Buddy Shaban, the late Buddy Shaban, who was rewarded by the DA at the time for giving the party its votes to get in charge. In 2016, that was the big one. That was the big one when the ANC was first booted out of Johannesburg and when one Herman Mashaba took over as DA mayor of the City of Gold with the support of parties like the EFF and the Inkatha Freedom Party. The ANC was in opposition for almost 3 years in Johannesburg. They're quite a poor opposition, I must say. Also in Tshwane, the party has almost disappeared from the radar. And in Cape Town, almost obliterated from the political scene in the province where I live and the city. So there's no reason for me to say the ANC will not accept electoral defeat. I think it's a bit of a scaremonger that some analysts use. So far, the ANC has accepted defeat in cities where they've lost power. They were, of course, out of power in KZN in the first 2 democratic elections when the IFP was still in charge of KZN. They've been out of power in the Western Cape for the past few provincial elections here. The ANC is quite poor in opposition. They don't really know how to do opposition. But there's no signs for me that they will oppose a opposition coalition. The more interesting question, Carol, I think, is to what extent will the ANC compromise to stay in power, specifically with a party like the EFF? If you cast your mind back to November last year, Julius Malema had a list almost as long as my arm of demands that he wanted to discuss with the ANC before voting with them in the cities. And the ANC, and I think it would be fair to say under President Ramaphosa's lead, just swept it off the table and said, we are not interested in talking about removing the stem from our national anthem or changing our position on expropriation with compensation. But we're now in a different ballgame. The ANC is losing more power. It's widely expected they will go quite substantially under 50% in 2024. And would the ANC be more palatable this time to consider some of those more radical demands by a Julius Malema or a Gayton McKenzie before entering into coalition deals at national and provincial level? And I think that also brings us back to the importance of December conference of the ANC, where there are certainly politicians in the running. I would argue someone like Paul Mashatile is much closer to a party like the EFF than Cyril Ramaphosa. You know, if a Paul Mashatile succeeds in becoming the deputy president of the ANC, what does that mean for the party's position in moving closer to radical parties like the EFF?
Thank you for that, Adriaan. Chris asks, Zintle, I'm going to point this to you. If at all have the coalition political parties, or how, if at all, have the coalition political parties dealt with their representatives who went against the coalition agreement in Johannesburg? Has there been any talk of repercussions, Zintle?
So yes, they have. In Joburg, an IFP councillor was initially dismissed from the party for voting with the coalition for the ousting of the Gama. And I've heard that there are workings within COPE to try and remove Colleen Makhubele from the party, but that's not really something that has to try and remove her, because she forms a critical part of the coalition the agreement with the ANC. So there have been consequences from some of these individual members.
Jason, I'm going to pose this question to you. They say recent history of coalition has shown that coalitions of sort of anything but the ANC are unstable and short-lived. In your view, what would be a workable coalition that would lead to policy certainty and continuity? Is it a foregone conclusion that coalition politics is the future of this country? I think that's what we've all been saying in this discussion so far, right, Jason?
It is a foregone conclusion. I think coalitions are the future. I think your first question is a bit of a difficult question around what we can do to make this work. I think we first of all, we political parties, of course, need to steer away from going into, I would want to use the word going into bed, or going into a coalition or an agreement with parties that they know they do not share the same values. I think that's where most of the problems come in. At this present point, our coalitions are based on getting the ANC out, getting the DA out, or it really depends on which way the wind blows. And that's not good for sustainability. It's not good for service delivery at a municipal level, and for things like foreign policy, and for whether we join certain multilateral bodies around the world. So I think what we need to do is we need to look at legislation, and we need to to come to the table and say, especially in Parliament, we need to create a legislation that says we have this coalition, we take this coalition agreement, we sign it by whoever party signs it, and we give that to an outside body that can possibly manage it. These are one of the things that have been presented in Parliament to say the IEC maybe manages this coalition agreement. Before we go into this agreement, we ensure that in the next 2 years, this mayor will take over, or this is the succession race. If someone dies, or if someone is ousted, or whatever happens. We had a similar situation in Israel, where the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, he knew that in the second year of the 4-year term, he would be replaced by Yair Lapid, who is from a different party. So we need to sort out those kind of things, and really political parties need to come to the party and say, look, we need to come to the party and form a coalition government for services, and not just to stab each other in the back. And I think we are far away from that, but inevitably, coalitions are our future. I don't see the ANC getting a 50% in 2024.
Talking of services, Alex, how do you think the instability in the city of Joburg is affecting services? As we speak now, Joburg has a massive water crisis. I didn't have water for the last few days. Can you talk to me about the correlation between this instability in governance and service delivery?
Absolutely. But I think it's also important to remember that lack of water doesn't just happen with one mayor. I mean, this issue, it's the same as the electricity issue. This has been happening for many, many years, and has been coming for many years. But obviously, the instability within these governments doesn't help matters much. As we are sitting here, there is actually nobody in charge of the infrastructure in Johannesburg. So we have no water, no electricity, and no leader. And that will come into play when the new cabinet has been elected, which is why our new mayor is kind of running the show. But there is the ANC is kind of touting this district development model, which is supposed to be the kind of blueprint for municipalities, going ahead, and that really should be kicking in.
Can I interrupt you, Alex? Can I interrupt you and say that the district development model is a platitude that Cyril Ramaphosa came with and endorsed by Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma that doesn't really mean much. You go to these talk shops and they'll workshop this thing as the silver bullet that's going to solve all our local government problems, when actually no one really understands what it actually means. It's a kind of a pairing together of districts and interventions in terms of budgeting, etc. It does not work. It has not worked. And the ANC has admitted that it has completely failed on a local government level. So I think what happens, especially in, the sad reality is that the city of Johannesburg is not, and this is me risking sounding like Jacob Zuma, but it's not a municipality, in somewhere in far-flung rural KZN where there's no services. You can actually see a reversal in service delivery. So not that there's no service delivery, there's actually a reversal and a decline, and Joburg feels and is derelict. And so, where the ANC stands now, as now the newly appointed government, the failures that it has to deal with are of its own making.
No, absolutely, and that's what I meant by, it's not the most recent mayor's issue. I mean, the building of dams should have happened 20 years ago. The Katse Dam and the connections which have to take place in order for us to build reservoirs in Johannesburg, in order for us to feed the growing population, these things should have taken place conservatively at least 10, 20 years ago. Where the demand for water in Johannesburg is increasing by 4% every year because the population is growing. by 150,000 people every year. But like with electricity, the infrastructure has not grown. So in 10 years' time, 40% of the water that we need is not accounted for. And where we're going to get that is, it's in the hands of our leaders right now. And like you said, there is no plan, really.
We wrapping up the discussion. I think it's been a phenomenal discussion so far. We could speak for another hour, I think, but everyone has to go back to their day jobs, and Zintle has to be telling us what's happening elsewhere in relation to politics in this country. But to say, Adriaan, that we cannot talk about coalitions without talking about new players. There was a question that has come in from Carol, who said William Gumede suggested that all the main opposition parties who really believe in the Constitution and the rule of law should form a broad coalition before the 2024 election and agree to work together with possibly an outside person. And this person has touted the like of Songezo Zibi, who's a former journalist, who has indicated that he's entering the political landscape to ensure the ANC is voted out. Can that actually happen? Can there be an agreement before the time? And what role will people like Songezo Zibi play post the elections 2024?
Well, that's the dream, right? I mean, a centrist constitutional movement committed to the rule of the law, but that's not the reality that's playing out in the city of Joburg. If you go onto Twitter right now, which I don't do a lot these days, you will see the DA and Action SA leaders using their time and salaries to have a very puerile go at each other on a social media platform. I mean, I'm not sure how you build trust in the electorate and in people to go and vote for you again, if that's going to be your attitude. I think specifically the DA and the Action SA has some very deep reflection to do. The Action SA was born out of Herman Mashaba, of course, leaving the DA, doing that breakaway, having a fantastic run at the polls in November last year, almost pulling 20% of votes in Johannesburg, pulling more votes in Johannesburg than the EFF. Ideally placed to take over Gauteng provincial government with the DA in 2024. But if these two parties can't even agree on very basic things, like did they break the coalition agreement or not, the DA says they did. Action SA says there were provisions made in that agreement to renegotiate it, and that it was very reasonable of the parties to ask for a speaker from the IFP. If they can't agree on something relatively minor, and sacrifice the city of Joburg going back into the hands of the ANC, probably with the EFF and the PA benefiting, I'm not sure that creates trust with voters to vote for these parties going into 2024. So I think there is an onus on these so-called democratic constitutionalist rule of law parties to show, not only speak, but to show through their deeds on how they behave in these governments that they are worth voting for. And just the last point, Qaanitah, I think the most stable of all the coalition governments at this moment probably is probably Tshwane, where the EFF, neither the ANC nor the EFF is part of that coalition. So in Tshwane, between the DA, the Action SA, and other smaller parties like the ACDP, COPE, etc., they had enough seats to put together a relatively stable government. But how will this friction between the DA and Action SA that has now started in Joburg and spilled over onto Twitter in all its glory, how will that now affect these relationships in other municipalities? So I think as much as the focus is on the ANC on this one, it should also be on the DA and Action SA.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining this discussion. I think it was incredibly valuable. We will be having similar discussions like this at News24. We are committed to covering these coalitions, confusion, and bring you what it means for ordinary citizens in these different municipalities. I think it's important for us to track the talks and what happens ahead of the 2024 general elections. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your subscription to News24. We appreciate it. If there's anything else that you would like to know about coalitions, we will be having a thorough discussion on our News24 opinions pages tomorrow. Our Friday briefing is also going to be focused on coalitions. We're going to hear from some of the political party leaders, Helen Zille, for example, on where they stand on this matter. But this conversation is not ending here. We are determined to bring you all the role players in this discussion. It's absolutely important for us to hold them accountable, for you, our viewers, our readers, and for the citizens of South Africa. Thank you very much for your time.